Today we are continuing our pro-life apologetics. Next week, we are actually taking a break from pro-life apologetics until the week after because I'm going to be on vacation. But fear not, we have none other than Dr. Jordan Ferrier himself.
Wait, he's a doctor now?
No, he's not. He's a doctor to me. But if there was like a PhD in Kelvin, he would have it, but they don't have that. Yes. So, but he will be teaching next week on the two views of God, but that have basically the two views of God that have impacted the church the most, and where Protestants, I think, go wrong, or maybe you'll touch on that. I don't know. You're teaching a thing on two views of God. You do not want to miss it because you're going to be in here. You'll probably have a few of those moments where you go, oh, that's what I've been taught. Oh my gosh, that is a problem. So it'll be. I know I definitely had those moments when I talking with him before but not without a fight. I'll have you know, I went down swinging, but I did get destroyed. So it's okay. Jordan's been actually very influential in my life. So please be here next week, support him, listen to him, and all that good stuff. And feel free to ask questions and all that good jazz. So. Now, we're going to get into discussing types of abortions, and that's just because I think it's important for us to know how it's done. I don't want to be gruesome. I don't have pictures, so that's just, but a couple things. A lot of people don't know how abortions are necessarily done. Many people are actually, when a lot of people, you hear like the vague term, it's a medical procedure, right? It's just kind of a vague term. So a lot of people, even young ladies who have abortions, don't really know what's happening, right? They keep people as in the dark as possible in this. So again, if you meet a woman who's had an abortion, don't think that she's some monster who really wanted that done. She doesn't necessarily know. Does that make sense? A lot of people are ignorant and deceived, and they don't know what happened. So be careful not to like demonize somebody just because they've had one. Plus, if you're demonizing them because they've had one, that's doing the exact opposite of what we want, which is not just saving a life, but also bringing someone unto God. And there's no sin that God cannot forgive, right? So God can forgive you, and I think we need to emphasize that when we talk to somebody, right? So I think that's important, but I just want to make sure we emphasize that a little bit because sometimes when you get into types of abortions, I'll be explaining this and somebody goes, well, how could somebody ever do that to their own child? Well, some people don't know that that's what happened to their child, right? I mean, you're covered in a sheet, you might even be put under, but you don't really see what's going on. You just hear the doctor saying, oh yeah, we'll take care of it. And don't worry, it's just a medical procedure, right? So all right. The first ones, we're just going to kind of go from bottom up. And then if we have time today, I'll get into some of the biblical passages that people talk about when abortion comes up, okay? So, all right. Types of abortions. We have a pills-based abortion, which this is when performed through taking two medications in pill form. I'm not going to even try to pronounce them because I always get them up. I think, actually, I'll give it a shot. I think it's mifepristone. I'm going to mess that up. Anyway, so we have two different ones that people take. These two drugs work together to end a pregnancy, and it can be done all the way up to 10 weeks, okay? So you can do a pill to eliminate a pregnancy up to 10 weeks. So you'll get it and the pill to take home with you. And if you take it a few hours or up to 4 days after the first pill, you can either take the medicine by mouth or by placing the pills actually into the vagina itself. And it makes your uterus contract to push the pregnancy out. Does that make sense? All right, you guys you walked in at a really funny time at that. You really did. Like you walked in like put the what in the what. But this is what ends up happening when this happens is that it starts the woman cramps. It starts to bleed very heavily, and it takes about 1 to 4 hours after taking the pill. It costs $300 to $800 to get this done. Okay. Now, have you ever, I don't want to be like too on the nose, but has anyone here known someone who's had a miscarriage? Right, okay. If anyone knows Callie, you've known someone. So y'all probably at least know my wife. And it is very painful. And it's kind of that same idea. It's forcing something like that to happen. So it's very painful. It's very bloody. It's a very not pleasant experience. So again, when we're talking about protecting women, I don't know if you know this also, abortions actually can have an impact on a woman's ability to reproduce. So if she has an abortion, it can actually jack some things up in there where it's hard for her to reproduce. So if she wants children later, it can actually cause health problems. So again, it is not a compassionate thing for women. It is not a good thing. And many people have been deceived by that. So I want to make sure we emphasize that a little bit, okay? Then there's also, which is, again, I cannot pronounce these for my life. We should have somebody in here who can. Andrew, you're like 1/16 of a doctor. Can you say that?
I think that's methotrexate.
Hey! Clear as mud with the Irish accent, though. It's just more jargon. All right. This can be taken by pill or a shot and can be done in the first 7 weeks. It is actually a drug that's used to kill cancer. So just as it stops cancer cells from multiplying, it also stops the embryo from multiplying. So this then, when it contacts the uterus, to release its contents, primarily used for ectopic pregnancies. Now, one of the things I wanted to make sure we did talk about briefly in here. Ectopic pregnancies. Does anyone know what that is?
Outside the uterus.
Right. It did not implant in the uterus. So you have a fertilized egg like a normal child would be, how they are conceived. But instead of going into the uterus where the child is supposed to grow, it usually gets stuck in like the fallopian tubes. And this will kill the baby and the mother. It cannot survive. And neither can the mother with the pregnancy in the tubes. So an ectopic pregnancy, the only treatment that exists is to actually eliminate the egg. Okay? So the fertilized egg has to be removed, otherwise both mother and child die. Does that make sense? So there's really no way we don't have a way currently to be able to move it from the tube into the uterus without destroying the fertilized egg. Okay, does that make sense? So sometimes Christians are very ignorant on these things, and they go, no, there's no reason ever for us to ever destroy the child. Well, this isn't something that there's any other option unless you just want everyone to die, right? So, and that is what this is primarily used for. This particular, I actually have a good friend of mine, his wife and him went through this, but it wasn't something but again, I will stress, it's not something that we go, oh, it's not a human being, right? Oh, it's just a clump of cells that we flush through the tube. Instead, no, this was your child and there was no way to save it. So it's something to be mourned, not necessarily something to be dehumanized. Make sense? Okay. So, and this right here, so the abortion, this process starts within 1 to 12 hours after you take the medicine. And again, the woman will suffer from cramps and bleeding, and the bleeding may be heavy for 4 to 8 hours. In rare cases, which is 1 to 2%, it may not work, and surgical abortion might have to take place. Okay, and the cost is about $300 to $1,000 depending on where you go. Okay, another type of abortion is what they call vacuum aspiration. And this is the actually most common abortion. And again, I'm not doing this to be graphic. I'm not doing this to be nasty, but it's important because before I was in finance, I was in operations management. When I was working as an operations manager and a pastor at the same time, okay? And I worked with a whole warehouse full of guys, and so one day abortion came up, and they were all talking about how horrible it would be to get rid of abortion and all this stuff. And of course, me being me, I'm like, well, I'm actually pro-life, and I think abortion is harmful to our society. We went back and forth. I was like, well, do you even know how they do the most common abortion? And they're like, well, no. And so I explained the process, and it was funny. And by funny, I mean not funny, like hilarious, but it was interesting to see their faces slowly drop as they realized what took place. And I had one guy like, what? They do what? Because people don't know. People don't know. So again, before you demonize, make sure that maybe the person has an opinion just because that's the popular opinion of today. That's pushed today. And they think that, and they think they can just trust the medical journalists, right? But that's not necessarily true, because I think we all know that there is a bias in media, right? Right? We all know that, right? Please tell me we all know that. So This is done usually in the first trimester or early in the second trimester. So the first 12 weeks or 12 to 16 weeks of pregnancy, and is also called suction aspiration. So this is not painful for the mother, but it actually crushes the child, literally. So what happens that they go in there and they use basically like a scissors kind of tool, and they use that to scrape the sides of the uterus and to ensure no body parts of the baby are left in the uterus. Because what they do is they actually rip the baby limb from limb and then suck it down a vacuum, which crushes it down into little pieces. And then they use this whole like scooping mechanism to get it all out of there, because if they leave a piece of the baby in there, it can actually cause some serious health problems of the mother. So they use an ultrasound during the procedure, but not all abortionists do so. After the baby is actually taken out of the uterus, the baby's tissue will be examined to determine if all the pieces of the baby were removed, which is basically checking the body parts. So they'll actually like set up like, oh, here's the torso, here's the legs, here's the arms. And it's probably like, just even saying it feels so barbaric. And this is why I've said, so many people, if you're having this conversation, be like, what? So you think that women who've had abortions should be put in jail? No, because a lot of women don't know what's going on. Many doctors do. And there's a lot of testimonials of people who went to the medical field. Oh yeah, we'll just do this abortion. They've had the trainings, they've had the things, and they went in there. And then once they saw what happened, they're like, I'm never doing this again. This is horrible. There's a lot of people, actually big pro-life speakers, that have that the moment when they saw an abortion firsthand was the moment they were like, this is not okay. Okay. So I think medical professionals know what's going on, but I think a lot of women don't. So when you actually explain that this is what they do, is that they actually take, and they have shown that the babies actually will try to move away from the instruments. Like when they're in there searching around, the baby's trying to pull away, like get away, get away, get away. It's a defensive mechanism, right? So people are like, oh, the nervous tissue doesn't work that way. They're not developed yet. I'm like, yes, it does. And you are still pulling a child limb from limb. So though it's painless for the mother, it is not painless for the child. Costs about $600 to $1,000. And I don't know if you know this, but actually people at Planned Parenthood, they're incentivized by profit. So they will always be pushing abortion because that's where they make the most money. And many Planned Parenthood employees have come out. Basically, they had like abortion quotas, which is even more disturbing. And so remember, when the people are like, oh, these places are here to help women, they're there to make money off women. That's what's going on, okay? All right, so another one is dilation and evacuation. So dilation and evacuation, also known as D&E, is an abortion procedure that's used in the second trimester, usually after the 14th week of pregnancy. So it can be up to a 2-day procedure because they have to dilate, right? So that way they can get in there. And on the first day, the doctor dilates or widens the cervix to make sure it's easier to remove the pregnancy tissue. On the second day, the doctor uses forceps to remove the fetus and placenta, a tube to suction out the uterus, and scoop-like instrument called a curette to scrape out the uterine lining. About $1,500 is the cost on that. And because you're getting way further into the pregnancy, right? So it gets more and more complex. And so it's very similar to the other one, still just as barbaric. And then we have what they call induction abortion, which is done in the second trimester of pregnancy. It may be an option if you are past the 24th week pregnancy and can no longer get a D&E procedure. And it's actually pretty rare, by the way, in the U.S. These are also considered like kind of late-term abortion procedures. But you'll get medicine that puts you into labor. Your uterus will contract to release the child. Your provider might also use suction or a spoon-like instrument called, again, a curette to clean out your uterus. And you literally deliver a baby as they kill it, okay? So they give medication over the course of a day, which can cause vomiting, diarrhea, many other symptoms. And sometimes there may be an injection to kill the baby, but not always. So sometimes they'll put you through it, and they actually go in there. They do like a lethal injection to the child to kill the child, so that way you give birth basically to the corpse. Or they will, as the baby comes out, that's when you get the whole crowning thing, and they put scissors in the head or sever the spinal cord, things like that. And you should see all your guys' faces right now. these are the conversations you should have with people when they're talking about it. Like, are you familiar with how this is done? Because it's easy to talk in ambiguous terms, right? Abortion. Okay. Oh, the fetus, if you use that. But if you actually start explaining the process, it's really hard for the euphemisms to build a defensive mechanism in the mind. Does that make sense? Because you're actually making it real. And then we have full-fledged late-term abortions, which are, some consider an abortion late term if it's done after the 20th week of pregnancy. Others say it's when it's done in the third trimester entirely. Still, others consider it late when the fetus is simply viable, meaning it could survive outside the womb. And if you guys were here last week, you remember me saying that once the baby is actually completely viable, there is no reason for abortion for the health of the mother, because the child can survive outside the mother. So you can remove the child and let it live, and then the mother doesn't have to worry about the pregnancy anymore, okay? So at this point, to abort the child is just immoral, right? Completely. Which I, of course, am advocating that all abortion is immoral. But anyway, so these are particularly gruesome since the child is fully grown. Surgical techniques involve crushing, dismemberment, removal of the fetal body from a woman's uterus mere weeks before or even after the fetus reaches a developmental age of potential viability outside the mother. Some even give a lethal injection. Others have scissors shoved into the base of the neck or skull and forcibly ripped apart. Some countries even stab the baby's skull as it's crowning, as I mentioned before. If breached, they may even start cutting or tearing limbs off or break the neck or reach in and stab the skull. Basically, it results in dismemberment, stabbing, or all the above. So it's when, and remember when we're saying that these are things that are lovely for the mother, these are things for that, this is a human right issue. Does this seem like it's respecting human rights? It's the exact opposite, right? It's literally destroying a human life. So again, now those are very graphic. I understand that. Now that we're all happy we came to church today. But remember, people don't know all of this, right? They don't. So before you're just like, if you're talking to a lady who's had one, and like, oh, you sat there and you tore your child limb from limb, like half the time they don't know. Okay, so it gets a little ridiculous when people start acting that way, and I've seen Christians act that way, which is why I say I'm just giving you vital information, and I want you guys to take that information and know how to navigate it in your conversation. If you're talking to a woman who is really trying to wrestle the topic, she's suffering or whatever, you don't need to punch her in the face by being nasty, right? But sometimes you're talking to someone who's just being vindictive. And those are the ones that it's more okay to get a little bit more punchy. How many of you guys have ever talked to a vindictive pro-choice person? Yes, and it's pretty horrendous, right? At my old church, there was a young man in our church who got completely caught away in like everything progressive. And he even was advocating that children should be able to be aborted under the age of 3. You know who he is. Yeah. Because they're not fully conscious, of who they are. Their individuality hasn't been discovered yet. So he took their logical conclusion to the fullest. And I was like, that is straight evil, right? So that was a person that I had no problem getting out my bulldozer and just going to work with it, right? But when someone's like, okay, maybe they're raped. Okay, well, that's not the person you pull out your bulldozer on. That's the person you talk to and empathize with. That's a person that I would usually bring my wife in to talk to, because my wife is such a compassionate, loving person, and she's able to she's one of those people that can word things in such a way where you're like, wow, that was really good. So anyhow, now let's talk about scripture and abortion, okay? And like pro-life abortion. Because when you talk to people, they will use, we all know pro-life verses, right? We all go to a pro-life church. I'm sure we're familiar with those passages. But there are passages people try to take and spin toward a pro-choice position. Are you guys familiar with that? When that happens, if you're biblically literate, it'll spin your head for a second, because you're like, whoa, how did you even pull that out of that, right? Mm-hmm. But I do want us to approach some of these. So I have, I didn't put every verse up here. I just have the references, okay? Like I said, when we finalize this series, I'll get everyone's emails and I'll send you guys all my notes, and you guys can have a good time reading over that if you could read my thoughts. So All right, so but Exodus 21, 22 through 25 is a popular one. It reads like this. And in fact, actually, what a lot of people will do, if you're talking to a pro-life, pro-choice person, is they will read one part of this verse, and then they will not finish the passage. And it's really, because most of these people, and I'm not trying to sound mean, but a lot of these people who are doing this don't read their Bibles very much. So they find their little selected verses, and then when you actually show the fact that actually it doesn't say what you think it says, it can make kind of for a funny moment. But verse 22 says this: when men strive together and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there is no harm, the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judge determines. Now, hold on. Don't read out further. What pro-choice people will say, they'll point this out, like, see, look, so that the child comes out, but there is no harm. They think that no harm is referring to the woman not receiving harm. And then they're saying, but if there is harm, simply the man pays them, like the child's more of a piece of property than a person. Okay, that's what they're saying. So they're saying that this law of Moses is saying that, hey, if there is harm, then there's simply a payment, right? It's not a person, because the penalty for killing a person in the Old Testament is death. Okay, so you guys see how they kind of twist that and run with that a little bit? Now, here's the unfortunate part for them is when you read forward. But if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. So the pro-choice claim is that this shows that it's property because the child's injury, death, or abortion only requires payment. But obviously the rebuttal is that when you simply read the rest of the verse, it makes it very clear that it'll be paid life for life. Because, and a lot of people do not like what I'm about to say, but you have to understand the Old Testament. So the Old Testament, the law, the Torah, if you will, it was the man, when he married somebody, all of it in his household was considered his property. So his wife was considered his property, and his children were considered his property also. Now, that's not to say that they're only mere property. Actually, they had human rights and everything, but that's the way it worked. The man was the head, right? And it worked this way. They looked at it as property. So when someone says that, it's like, yeah, but that doesn't mean it's not a human to them, because that's just culturally how it worked. That's why the household of Will Hess, right? That was my household. All of that's in it. So anyway, do you guys, but that is actually one of the more powerful verses, because it actually shows if there is a loss in life, you pay life for life. So it's actually whenever they're like, well, Exodus 21, I'm like, yes. I'm like, let me show you where that's at. Okay? I get excited. So Psalm 139, and it is another popular one. Actually, I'm just going to pull these up like this. That way you can just see them, right? Yeah. And that way you guys can flip to them if you want. So Psalm 139, 13 through 16 says this. I'm sure this will be very familiar to all of you as soon as I start reading it. For you formed my inward parts, right? You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. This is a pretty straightforward verse. So I would always remember Psalm 139 if you're having these conversations with people and they're trying to defend a pro-choice position. But did you notice how David is saying not only did God form him and create him in his unformed substance and all these things, but notice how he was given personhood, right? God clearly viewed him as a person. For every one of them, the days that you were formed for me, when yet there was none of them. And so he goes, you knew my soul. It was not hidden from you. So this is very clear that the person in the womb, in David's mind, was a person, right? Not just a clump of cells. So very powerful verse for your pro-life discussions. Jeremiah 1:5, very popular. You guys are probably familiar with this one. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. He's discussing this to Jeremiah. sometimes people read this like the God's talking to them, right? And they look at oh yeah, God, before he formed me, he consecrated me and all the, okay, hold on. He's talking to Jeremiah. Relax. But it is nice to know the fact that it is clear that before he was born, he had him already consecrated, which means that there was already a person there even before he was born, right? So it's important as a powerful statement. Another one. So these are all pro-life verses, by the way, verses using the pro-life. Did not he who made the womb, made me in the womb, make him, and did not one fashion us in the womb? So again, in Job, we have that same idea of you were a person in the womb. Mm-hmm. Psalm 22:10, on you was I cast from my birth, from my mother's womb, you have been my God. Now, he didn't say from my birth, it's from my mother's womb, right? So, and also, of course, we're very familiar with when John the Baptist, the first time he met Jesus was really in the womb, and he leaped for joy, right? So, it's like, all right, cool. Now, we're going to get a little gross. I do not mean to be gross, but the Bible does talk about things that make us uncomfortable. So, Deuteronomy 23, you guys ever read parts of the Mosaic Law and go, what? So we'll talk about that a little bit here to help maybe we can make some of it make sense. So Deuteronomy 23, 10 through 11. If any man among you becomes unclean because of a nocturnal emission, such a polite way to say that, then he shall go outside the camp. He shall not come inside the camp. But when evening comes, he shall bathe himself in water, and as the sun sets, he may come inside the camp. Now, obviously, he's talking if there's like an ejaculation of sperm or like that at night. So what significance does this even have? Because in Leviticus, it seems like they're pretty concerned about it. If a man has an emission of semen, he shall bathe his whole body in water and be unclean until the evening. Well, this seems like a little odd thing to bring up, right? How many of you are uncomfortable now at church? Mary, like you're like, psh, I don't even care anymore. It's great. So anyhow, so here's the thing. The unintentional passing of a man's seed made him unclean because the Jews understood semen to actually be the actual seed of the man. That was the seed that brought life. So this was the very beginning of life to their minds. So he was to go out for the loss of even potential life and cleanse himself for the possibility of life lost. Same with a woman's menstruation. It's the literal, that even the potential life, the potentiality of it wasn't to be taken lightly. And then we're like, oh no, the Old Testament, the Jews, you hear this all the time, oh, Jews have no problem with abortion. And it's like, well, they took even the wasting of seed to be something to be considered, right? So, if you get into menstruation, it has a similar view. Leviticus 18:19, you shall not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness while she was in her menstrual uncleanness. And then also, Leviticus 15:19, when a woman has a discharge and the discharge in her body is blood, she shall be in her menstrual impurity for 7 days, and whoever touches her shall be unclean until the evening. So, and many people don't, there's a lot of cultural things I could explore here. I'll just mention a few, okay? So for one, during that time, remember, women weren't employed in the same way today. A lot of us take a lot of modern technology a little for granted. So one way a woman showed a lot of her worth and her value was through childbearing, okay? So a lot of times a woman in her marriage was wanting to be pregnant. So if she has a menstruation, that means pregnancy did not happen, right? So this was actually allowing her, and the rabbis talk about this if you get into some like the Talmudic stuff, that it was a way for women to grieve alone without having to worry about a man being like, hey baby, how you doing? And she's like, no dude, like leave me alone. I'm not pregnant, right? Also because, let's just be honest, a lot of women probably just want to be left alone when they're on their periods, right? Like, and these are some of the things that actually, these things that people are like, oh, that's horrible. It actually was a way for them to actually give women like a break and actually show them space and respect during that time, okay? A lot of times we don't think of it that way, but that's actually what theirs was. Because back then, it was a very different culture and far more barbaric, and women were just basically, in other cultures, treated as property, right? Treated as, not just as property, but as sexual property. Well, men weren't allowed to touch them during this time either. Okay? So women, again, had rights. They were told to be respected. Does that make sense? Okay? And we can get into, eventually I'm going to go through like all the weird parts of the Old Testament. We'll break it down completely culturally in this class because I think that'll be helpful for a lot of us. That way it's not as weird and confusing. So, all right. Now let's look at some pro-choice verses, all right? So we've looked at some weird reproductive verses that make everyone uncomfortable. We've looked at pro-life verses. Now let's look at some verses that pro-choicers use, okay? Now I'm not going to have us read the entire passage. But if you guys want to read it later, you can. It's in Numbers chapter 5. Numbers chapter 5, 11 through 31. It's a long passage. That's why I'm not going to read it. But how many of you guys have ever read the part where if a husband, this is the summary, husband suspects his wife of adultery, so she cheated on him, or he suspects that he does, and so he brings her to the high priest, and the priest goes through this whole questioning period. They do like an offering, and then they create a mixture with water and make her drink it, and then it says that it makes her womb fall away or her thigh fall away, depending on your translation. Have you guys ever read that part? And you go, what did I just read? And so what they say, pro-choice people are saying this is an abortion because she drinks this substance and the pregnancy from this other man is ejected from her womb. The problem with this is, one, such technology did not exist. But the major issue is that in the Midrash, which is a Jewish oral tradition, pregnant women, she was pregnant, she was actually forbidden from doing this ritual because they didn't want to bring any harm upon the child. So if it was to abort the baby, don't you think that'd be kind of useless? If a pregnant woman's not allowed to partake in it, then it's like, well, then it's not an abortion. Okay. So the Midrash makes that very clear that this dusty water was not meant to be an induced abortion. So never anywhere also is a child mentioned in the text. Merely it mentions a swelling of the abdomen and a falling away of the thighs. So according to ancient Jewish tradition, the Mishnah, a woman who was pregnant or nursing a child was not to undergo the ordeal at all. Josephus actually had a brief commentary, and he spoke about a belly swelling with discomfort and the right leg being popped out of joint. So whatever happens in this ritual to see if she cheated on her husband, it's not an abortion. Okay, that's what we can say. Now, what it seems to make clear that whatever she drinks makes her very uncomfortable. That's what it is to see. And basically, she's guilty. She doesn't. And it's a very weird situation, specifically when the husband thinks it and it goes to this whole ordeal. Anyway, that's that. So it's not an abortion. So whenever someone brings up that, go like, that's actually not even close to an abortion. It's just this weird ritual that they went through, and we don't really know much about it. That is actually one of those weird areas in Scripture where there's a lot of commentary around it. Like, well, it means more this, and you go, okay, but what's happening? And it doesn't really tell us. Okay, so yay for mysteries, and we always appeal to mystery, right, Jordan? That's my Calvinism dig for the day. Okay, all right. Moving forward, then we have Deuteronomy 28:53. Okay. Again, I don't have all these in here, but the claim is that Israel was told that they could eat their own children, therefore God it approves. Have you guys ever read that part where it's like, again, you'll devour your children and blah 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 blah, and there'll be utter destruction among you and famine and blah 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 blah. So people are like, see, devouring children, God's not pro-life. But this is literally what we call the is-ought fallacy. Just because it is in Scripture does not mean it ought to be done, right? There's a lot of things in Scripture. Cain also kills Abel. That is in Scripture. Does that mean you ought to kill your brother? No. The answer is no. No, I'm sorry. I know. Maybe if the purge becomes legal.
Quoting something too.
Right, but that's the thing, right? So this is the is-ought fallacy. Because it is doesn't mean it ought to be. The entire picture in this Deuteronomy passage was talking about famine and destitution due to disobeying God's objective morality, God, and what would result in that. We see this happen in 2 Kings chapter 6 as well. This King Elisha clearly was speaking. King Elisha clearly was speaking to him to obey the Lord, but Israel didn't, hence why they were under siege, and this is shown even more so by killing children. They're saying the depravity of it all, right? You have returned your back on God, now everything's fallen apart. People are devouring their children to survive because of this. It's not saying that you should. He's saying that this is bad. Make sense? So can you see already, like I said, once pro-choice people start bringing out their Bible verses, it makes you just cringe a little bit. Like, that's not, did you read that? Like, anyway. 2 Kings chapter 8 is another popular one for people to bring up. And it says that God is okay with having children ripped from the mother's womb, is what they're saying, because it says that they will be ripped from their mother's womb. That they should go there, kill all these people, and rip the babies from their mother's wombs. Once again, context is the enemy here. Elisha makes clear that this was an evil on the land of Israel. And that's an actual quote. Evil on the land of Israel, and the king shall surely die as judgment. So again, this here is not saying it's okay. It's saying it's an evil. So it's funny, a lot of the verses that they will use actually are usually in your favor. Does that make sense when you're having these conversations? Mm-hmm. So there are more, but of course, most of all, deal with like the general bombastic nature of like bombastic warfare language that we'll see. All right. Then quickly, we're just going to get into some things here where God controls life. Acts 17, many of you guys are probably familiar with this. Nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. He made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods of the boundaries of their dwelling place. Okay, so we see God gives life. Jeremiah 38:16. Then King Zedekiah swore secretly to Jeremiah, "As the Lord lives, who made our souls, I will not put you to death or deliver you into the hand of these men who seek your life." So, as I said, there are more ways we go about that, but this means since these things are in God's control, even if he were the one to execute judgment and death, to which we know he does at times in the Old Testament and whatnot, then that is not only his right, but also he is just to do so, because he's the judge of life and death. Does that make sense? So a lot of times people are like, well, God killed people, so why can't we kill people? I'm like, well, that's called a category error, my friend. Anyway, another thing, I forgot to add this in here in my pro-choice verses, and Samantha Deppie was in here, and she mentioned, I think in week 1 of this series, that God breathed the breath of life into Adam, and mankind became a living creature. So what they will say is that when the baby draws its first breath is when it's given personhood, because the breath of life, so God's breath of life gave us personhood, therefore that's what makes personhood in general, is the breath of life. Problem is, there's a lot of problems with that. First off, did you notice it's a descriptor of God's breath? The breath of life. It's not saying that that's when life is given. It's a descriptor of God's breath. And then it says, through that descriptor of God's breath, right, then mankind became a living soul. It doesn't say that when you're born and take your first breath, mankind became a living soul. You are completely taking that passage and twisting it around. God gave mankind the breath of life. Now, you're still at that question, what makes someone a person and what makes someone a life, okay? And it's not at first breath. So anyway, cool. Let's see, how much more we got here? Because we might look at this. So anyway, to disagree with what I'm saying as far as God being the author of life and all this, to disagree would mean to say that God is unjust. Hence, why not only is he higher than our ways and our thoughts higher than our thoughts, but he sees the big picture and knows all things. So basically say that God doesn't do these things, you have to say that God is unjust when he executes any sort of judgment. But remember, God sees the big picture. We don't always see the big picture, which I don't always think is the best way. I just want to make sure I'm clear. Yes, it is true that his thoughts are above our thoughts and his ways above our ways. That is true. I don't like that as a typical cop-out, though. A lot of Christians use that just because they have bad theology. And they'll use that statement to justify bad theological thoughts. Like, well, that's a contradiction. Well, his ways are above our ways. No. If you have a contradiction, it's a contradiction, okay? You can't just appeal to mystery on that one. Anyway, so plus death is only the enemy of those who don't have faith in God, remember? So otherwise, it's merely the end of the temporary and the beginning of the eternal. So this is like more of a heaven theodicy, but we'll get into the problem of evil and theodicies probably after we go through this series. So let's see. Do we have... Yeah, we have a few minutes. All right, so I just wanted to quickly pull up some other helpful comparisons that may be helpful for you, such as abortion and slavery. There's a lot of similarities between abortion and slavery. Have you guys ever noticed that? Okay, so for one, the arguments for slavery and abortion are eerily similar. My body, my choice could equal my property, my choice. It's not a human life, or it's an inferior human. So you have dehumanization. It's better off not living. It's better off than being in Africa. Oops. I'm not in control, so I can say, or I'm in control, so I can say. So I'm in control, I'm in control. So, hey, it's my body, it's my choice, I'm in control of this. Well, hey, it's my property, it's my choice, I'm in control here, so I have the final say, right? It's an appeal to authority. Unborn is unable to do anything. Slave, not self. Slave unable to do anything as well, right? So the slave is unable to do anything in that situation, is completely controlled and ruled over, but the unborn is unable to do anything as well. So also abortion and rape are actually even more similar. And that's why I say usually as soon as they say something, I will almost always bring the parallel to rape. Because most people, you're discussing abortion already, rape is kind of connected into that, so you may as well just talk about it, right? So rape and abortion are also eerily similar. Both are outrageous violations of another person's bodily autonomy. Both are forcibly carried out despite the will of perhaps the person on the other receiving end, right? They both did not consent or are too young to consent. Forced sex, if you are not conscious, is rape, right? So forced sex, if you're not conscious, is rape. However, and forced sex, if you are not mentally fit, is also rape. So remember, they say, well, babies, well, they're not born. Well, they're not conscious. So it's okay. They're not fully conscious. Well, forced sex, if you're not conscious, is rape. Well, they're not mentally aware yet. Well, if you're not mentally fit and it's forced sex, then that's considered rape. So again, if you're saying mental fitness creates something, does that make sense? Are you seeing the parallel there? So also sometimes committed by, and this is the sad reality, abortion and rape are sometimes committed by those who should love us the most, right? So these are things that are actually make it very eerily similar and can make us very uncomfortable. And of course, I just thought I'd put down there immoral. So, and selfish. All right. So that is that. But this I thought was kind of beneficial to go through. Now, do we have any questions or commentaries on any of the stuff we covered today? Can you guys already see how some of those fun pro-choice passages get crazily twisted? Like I said, if you have a smidgen of biblical literacy, it'll make you hurt, but it's important for you to know what they come up with.
What do you think? What are your thoughts on like Plan B and that sort of thing? Where
like pills?
Yeah.
Like day after kind of pills?
Yeah, that.
I'm against any protective measure that would kill a fertilized egg. So and some of it's like, well, it prevents implantation. Well, therefore it dies. So therefore, I'd be against that sort of thing. Because I think that as soon as there is conception, that's life. It's the only way we can consistently draw the line, right? We've already addressed that before. There's no consistent way to draw the line besides conception. And biologists, actually I talked to Dr. Jonathan McLatchie recently. He's a PhD biologist, professional in that field. And I asked him pre-interview. I forgot to ask him in the interview, though. I was like, we're going to ask you this, and we totally forgot to ask him. But I was like, so, Jonathan, when does life begin? I've been told I need to ask a biologist. Because apparently no one else knows. He goes, well, the only consistent way to say that, any biologist worth his salt would say at conception. I'm like, well, there you go. And I didn't get it on the interview. I feel so dumb for not, but anyway. All right, so, but yeah, all those things. I'm like, no, there's other ways there's other pills that people can take for birth control that don't do it that way, right? So anyhow, any other questions, comments?
I mean, one thing I was going to say, like the, what Deuteronomy 22 passage, the NIV actually uses the word miscarriage.
If there is a miscarriage.
Yeah. Or
Oh.
like will cause you to have a miscarriage type of thing.
Oh, so instead of just saying harm, it talks about the.
Yeah, but then ESV translates it like swelling of the womb.
Oh, yes. Yeah, exactly. Remember when I said that I hate the NIV translation? This is why. Because when it gets into a lot of those problem passages, it translates abysmally. Because it just says, literally, if you look in the Hebrew, it's a swelling of the abdomen. And then the NIV will be like, miscarriage. And it's like, well, that's a stretch. The swelling of the womb does not mean a miscarriage, right? Or not a womb, but of the belly. It doesn't even say that. It's like abdomen is the general term.
Could mean pregnancy.
What?
Could mean pregnancy.
The swelling of the, yeah, except for the fact where, like I said, the Mishnah, though, forbids it. So if a pregnant woman it was forbidden for a pregnant woman or a nursing woman to undergo the ritual, therefore it can't be an abortion because the abortion would be literally to destroy the pregnancy. But if you're not pregnant, you're not even allowed to do it. So it's this contradiction of like, well, then how do you...
I mean, you'd expect the opposite of swelling.
Right, so it's like, but it sounds like when you read that, if you look at it and you look at the Hebrew, it sounds like it was something that made her uncomfortable, like it was something like a swelling, like, because, I mean, you can also have that with bloating and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, stomachache, a lot of things, like basically a general punishment.
Like the sort of thing that would give you a stomachache.
And when they say the thigh falling away, that could also mean something like diarrhea, things like that. So basically it was like a general overall punishment for being unfaithful. That's...
Who had dinner with another man and it didn't sit with her well. She's bloated.
Wow. But yes. I question my friendships every day. So, but yeah, that's why if you read and that's why even like if you look at Jewish commentaries on that passage, if you look at Hebrew commentaries on the passage, all scholars are like, this is not a miscarriage. It's most likely some sort of other medical procedure that's happening, something that just makes her uncomfortable. Because it's like a dusty water, so it's probably something that just doesn't settle well with her. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's no medical reason to believe that would ever induce miscarriage.
Right, exactly. So, but I will say that is probably the strongest passage that they would have. So it's best to understand that a little bit. And like I said, it's really most likely, from what I've read, it's most likely something that just makes her very uncomfortable. And it's basically only done if they have to go through the whole process of getting it okayed by the high priest, who's like, nope, this woman's definitely sus. Like, there's definitely a reason to believe she cheated on you. So anyway, any other thoughts or comments? Helpful? Not helpful? Is it just good review for some of you? Because I feel like some of you guys, this is just review. Yeah, cool. And if that's the case, then next week, do not forget, Jordan Ferry will be teaching the two views of God. You do not want to miss it. You will definitely want to be here. Like I said, he has helped shape my theology quite a bit. And it's funny, things that used to, I was like, oh, that's a little wrong, but it doesn't bother me that much. I was telling him even today, I was like, yeah, now you've gotten me to the point where now it's like nails on chalkboard when I hear it, because it's so clear and obvious. So